Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Better Start Southend Lunch and Learn session hosted by the wonderful Savs. These bite-sized sessions explore a range of topics around child development, supporting families and working in the voluntary and community sector. My name is Dave Page, and I am from Triceratops Training, and I'm thrilled to be invited back again, because this isn't the first Lunch and Learn that we've done together. Triceratops Training, let me tell you just quickly about me and who they are. We're a tiny organisation that exists specifically to help small charitable organisations, whatever your legal status is. If you're trying to bring good into the world and you're small, we're interested in helping you. And we provide help through training like this with wonderful organisations like SAVs. And we also do one-to-one support with small charities in the areas of fundraising, obviously, because that's what we're talking about today, but also in strategy development, in impact as well. So do come and check us out, please. triceratopstraining.co.uk. We're just reviewing our offer over the summer, so leave your email address with us and we'll keep you updated with things that are launching in September or so. Now, that will do for the intro, will it? That will do for the intro. Let me share my screen and we can go and dive into what we're talking about today, which is trusts and foundations. Now, hopefully you can all see that slide. Now, trusts and foundations, or grants, fundraising as it's sometimes called, is quite a big subject. And what we're going to try and do in the next 40 or 45 minutes or so is pack in about 4 hours worth of learning. So please do strap yourselves in, and we will we'll go for it. So Roger has already covered a bit of housekeeping for us. So just to let you know how this session's going to work, I am just going to be talking to you, basically. We do have the slides available if you're a more visual learner, and they will be sent out to you after this session if you're joining us live as well. If you're not joining us live, I'm sure Savs will be able to get them out to you if you need them. Now, I'm not one of these trainers that particularly enjoys just reading slides to you. And so if there are any questions or anything, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll hopefully finish with 10 or 15 minutes to spare where we can cover a bit of a Q&A at the end as well. So if you are sitting comfortably, let's begin right at the very start, shall we? Now, I don't know how experienced you are with this form of fundraising, but just in case you are very new, let me just let you into the inner circle and explain very briefly about what we're talking about. So in the UK, there are more than 16,000, by last count, organisations that are out there who exist really to give money away, which is a really lovely position to be in, isn't it? They give over 4 billion away every year. Some of them are massive, and they, operate in big wooden panelled offices from the centre of London, and they give away hundreds of millions of pounds every year. And others maybe only give away a few £100 every year and operate from dining tables spread around the country. Now, most of these organisations, be they called trusts, foundations, livery companies, worshipful companies, they've got lots of different names. Most of them have a restriction on what kind of organisations and projects they can actually give money to. And most of them, again, accept applications from us. So usually by a letter or email or by an application form on occasion as well. When they're all combined together, they give about 20% of the total charitable income in the UK. Now, that's quite a low percentage, according to the misconceptions of some people. It used to be that trusts and foundations funded a lot more of the charitable sector, but they're not pots of gold anymore, and it is a challenging form of fundraising. Hopefully we'll help you meet that challenge as we're going through the session today. So they're given about 20% of that income, and there's 16,000 of them or so, but in reality, 18% of all the charitable money comes from just the top 300 funders. So there are thousands of them out there, but there are only 300 that are really big. And if you're a big charity, that's a bit of a problem. But if you're a small charity and a gift of, £500 wouldn't be a shame and £5,000 would be amazing, then we've still got plenty of potential out there as well. It's tough and it's competitive. And the best way, I think, of kind of shining a light on how competitive this kind of fundraising is to go back and have a look at that 16,000 number again, because actually in the UK, there's about 300,000 registered charities. Each one of those is looking to raise a bit of money from trusts and foundations. And in fact, no matter how good you are at this, you will likely get more declines than you will successes. And so it can be quite hard emotionally, actually, when you get ignored by these funders, especially if you're putting your heart and soul into writing the applications. And let's finish on this slide on a little positive. If you're doing it well, and it's perfectly possible not to be an expert and do this well, by the way. For every £1 you invest in fundraising to do with grants, you can kind of expect, if you're doing it well, to get about £8 back. The stats vary between about £7.50 and £10.50. So we'll say £8 and be conservative. Now, that's almost double what you can expect to get back from corporate fundraising at the moment. That might increase in the future. It's almost triple what you'll get back from doing community fundraising, like volunteer-led bake sales and them running marathons and things like that for you. So there's quite a bang for your buck available, as long as you can avoid wasting time. And that's one of the key elements that we're going to talk about today, is how you can engage in trust and grants fundraising, but not waste time with it, because that's a big pitfall that lots of organizations fall down. So where are we going to go over the next few minutes then? Well, there's kind of 6 stages to the process, and we're going to briefly touch on each of these 6, time permitting. And it's not just as simple as I'm going to tell you how to write a decent application. Sure, I'm going to give you some top tips around that, but actually I want to give you a bit more, because having all your ducks in a row and being well prepared for trust fundraising really is something that you can use to elevate your success rate. And that's where we're going to go first. And we're going to look at all of these in turn. So let's go and have a look at the first one then, which is internal preparation. So there are some essential bits of information that you're going to need to know before you can embark on creating wonderful applications. And some of it's quite obvious, actually. You need to know when the project starts, because you need to know when you need the money in by, for example. You need to know how much money you need to bring in. You need to know how long you're looking to fund this project or your organization as whole for. But you also need to know when your project ends, because a key part of grants fundraising is reporting back to funders and showing off about what you've managed to achieve with their money. We also need that key information to build up our applications and make them robust. So we need to know information about the history of our organizations. We need to know about the qualifications, maybe, of the people that we're working with. We need to know the needs that we're meeting and why they're real needs. We need to know about what activities we're doing. We definitely need to know about what those activities are achieving for the people or the communities or the different causes that we're working with. We also need to know about how we're going to be able to prove and articulate that success back to funders as well. That's what you kind of need just for your program. But if you're mixing in trusts and grants fundraising with other forms of fundraising, and you're doing that juggling act, as we often do in small charities. If I say small charities, I do include like CICs and grassroots organisations in that kind of catch-all term as well. You actually need to know of more than just those basic things. You need to know about the whole landscape of your organisation, because that's going to help you with planning. You need to know where you're going to be going in the next 3 years, probably. You need to know what projects are more important than other projects, so you can focus your funding there first, or your efforts on funding there first. You also need to know about your different kind of income streams, because you cannot just rely on grants to create a sustainable organization. You need to vary up and shake up your fundraising. Don't have your eggs all in the grants bucket. Actually, most of my, half of my time supporting charities one-on-one is to help them diversify away from just relying on trusts, because it's so competitive and it's hard. So you need to know about that kind of wider landscape. And also, you need to create yourself a document. And what that document is, now, if you've got a nice flashy CRM, that can probably handle it. But if you're like me and you don't, and you, like Microsoft Excel will be absolutely fine to do this. But you need to create a kind of application tracker document, like a spreadsheet. So you can see who you're applying to, how much for, and for what project. But on top of that, you maybe got another tab on that spreadsheet, which is a little database that you're building up of potential funders that you can go and talk to. And you're also building up a history about the funders that you talked to last year and then maybe the year before that as well. The reason why you create that, and also the reason why you never delete any of your applications, is because next year and the year after that, you're going to thank yourself, because you want to go and refer back and see what you did and how you can improve it. I've actually got a template for that, which I will happily send you. If you email me, david@triceratopstraining.co.uk, I'll happily send you a template for that. But having that key document is going to help you keep on top of everything and not make silly mistakes like applying to the same funder twice within a couple of months. And yes, I have done that before, and no, it did not go down very well with the funder, as you would imagine. So you've got this kind of information, and if you can gather that all together in one place, again, it's going to boost your efficiency. And putting in the effort to do that maybe at the start of your journey is going to pay off dividends in saved time down the road. So that's the internal prep, number one. Told you it was a whirlwind tour, because we're on to number 2 already, and this is what people always want to know. Dave, where do we find more funders to fund us? Well, I should probably start by saying, if you are finding it really hard to find relevant funders to fund you, which, knowing the kind of work that you're doing through, being connected to a better start, you might be all right. But if you're finding it really hard to find funding, maybe trust funding isn't the best idea for your organization. That's a bit scary sometimes, because it means you need to do other forms of fundraising which aren't just nice and safe sitting behind a desk. But if you do need help for that, there's loads of resources that SABs have got that can help you through that. And of course, Triceratops Training is here for you as well. So trusts and foundations, that kind of grants fundraising we're talking about this morning, it's not for every organization. But I'm just going to fire on and assume that it is for you. Now, out there, somebody figured out many moons ago that you can make quite a lot of money from charities by having a decent database available for people to go and have a look and find potential funders. And there are lots of them out there, and many of them you have to pay for. So the market leaders are the Directory of Social Change, the DSC. They've got 4 different databases that you can all buy for £500 a year. But if you're like me and don't like paying for things that you don't necessarily need paying for, there are other options out there. So first thing I would say to you folks is, if you are in the Southend area, go and have a wee chat with SABs. They've got that local knowledge that you can tap into. And that's a brilliant place to start. That's why SABs exist, or one of the many reasons right now. What you can also do I would go and visit a website called the Charity Excellence Framework. I just realized I haven't included them on this slide. So I'll say that again, charityexcellenceframework.org.uk. they've got a really wonderful funding finder that seems to be growing every month. And they've also got a newsletter that you can sign up to. It's not quite as efficient, but it is good. And they've started putting AI into it and stuff. I've not used it in a couple of months, so I've not seen that in action, but apparently it's good. That's what my wee fundraising chums are telling me anyway. I wanted to show you a little trick. Let me figure out how to, let me figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Oh, heck, everything's gone wrong. There we go. I want to share a little trick that you can do on the Charity Commission website. There we go, Charity Commission website. There we go. So this is the homepage for the Charity Commission website. And what you can do is click on Find a Charity. And you have to click on it again because that's annoying. And then instead of searching for like trusts or whatever in this box, see if you click on the advanced search button. You suddenly come to this page, which is, funnily enough, the advanced search page. And you've got lots of different details that you can search for. And what you want to do, you want to come down to this classifications kind of section and then scroll down to the bottom. And you've got this really lovely little box sitting all on its own, which says the main way of carrying out purposes is grant making. So if you tick that and then go down to the bottom and click search, that's going to return to you every single charity in the UK that's registered with the Charity Commission, not charities up north in Scotland because they're registered with Oscar, but every English and Welsh charity that has told the Charity Commission as part of their charitable activity, they give out grants. And that's going to bring back thousands. And you don't have a need to find thousands. You just have a need to find, I don't know, a few dozen maybe. So what we can do is we can zoom in. And there's different ways of zooming in. So if you come back to the classifications bit, find the area that you're working with. Children and young people. Let's go there. And that's still going to probably bring back far too many. So we go down to local areas in England. And if we get lucky, there'll be one that says, where are we? Is it there? Have I missed it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Southend-on-Sea, there we go. And if we click search, we've got 14 different charities who say they exist to give grants and they work with young people in Southend. Now, looking down that list, some of them might not be much use. So the Essex Athlete Foundation, well, they've not talked to the Charity Commission in, what's that, 5 years. So they're probably not operating anymore. But the Fowler Smith and Jones Trust catches my eye. They've got quite a lot of money and they've got trust in their name. There's maybe potential there for us. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of them is going to be useful for you, but it can build up a list. And by combining that, I think you can search more zoomed out, like for the kind of, you know, Essex region or the East region. But if you zoom out a bit further, and if you've got those databases that you're looking at as well, you should be able to find enough trusts to give you plenty of work to do this, to do over the next year. That is simply the process that I go on to find trusts when I'm doing one-to-one works with charities. Occasionally, and I don't know if they've got it at SAVS, but Roger will let us know, the Directory for Social Change, sometimes the local CVS organisations have either a digital subscription as part of their work that you can borrow, or they've got the they do a book every year and they've got access to that paper book. So you can go down, visit them, take your phone and a cup of coffee and take some photos of potential trusts for you. If SABS don't have it, I'm sure they can get it in next year's budget, or your library might have it. Up in Glasgow, we've got a couple of versions that are just held in the central libraries for charities to go and access. So that's options, and that's probably how you're going to find plenty of organizations to apply to. If you don't, maybe trusts and foundations fundraising isn't the best use of your time. Okay, let's go back to our presentation, if I can find it. So I'm used to using Zoom I'm muddling through on Teams, but we'll get there. Don't worry. Right. There we go. So finding potential funders. You don't need to pay for a subscription if you can't afford it. If you can afford it, well, you get 1 or 2 grants in, I'm sure your costs are going to be covered. But if you struggle to afford it, there are plenty of other options. So we're going and finding these potential funders, but we're wanting to do more than just actually locate them. We're wanting to find out information about them and information that is going to be very useful for us. So this is a nice list, actually, of what we are looking for. So, I mean, we start with the obvious ones. Do they fund our type of work? Do they fund the kind of work that you're doing? If they don't, then don't apply to them. So if you're doing work with young people and that trust promotes and wants to support work with old people, don't apply to them, because there's going to be loads of charities that do work with older people who are going to be applying to them, and they're going to be getting the money, and your application, your hard work's going to just go straight in the bin. And they're not going to tell you it's in the bin. They're just not going to respond to you at all. It's a waste of time. So make sure, first of all, they do fund your type of work. Make sure as well, actually, that they fund your scale of organisation. I was doing a training session with the Four, who's a funder in London, and they only fund charities who have got an income of under 500,000. They're actually a really good funder, so you can go and check them out if you've got an income of under 500,000. As we've just seen through that kind of charity commission search, there are some funders that only fund certain areas of the country, and if you can find a funder that only serves Southend, then you're actually excluding all of the other organisations around the country. And so you're reducing the level of competition, which hopefully is going to boost the chances of you getting a grant. Some organisations don't like to fund social enterprises. Some organisations don't like to fund charities that are based on a particular faith. Some organisations only fund charities that are based on particular kinds of faith. There are all lots of different exclusions that you need to be aware of, because if you do meet any of those exclusions, no matter how tenuously, you're probably going to end up in the bin and not on the table being considered. So look out for those. You're also looking to uncover how and when they want you to apply. Do they want a letter? Do they want an email? Have they got an application form to fill in? Most trusts have windows where they open applications. So the Four from yesterday, for example, they've got 3 windows that they space out through the year. So if you send them an application outside of that window, it doesn't even get read. It just gets put straight in the bin or deleted. So you're figuring out when you need to apply. And also you're kind of playing with the tension of that with, the progress of your different projects, because they're going to need to have the money in the bank at certain different points through the year. So it's a bit of a balancing act with your planning, but if you can find that out, that's brilliant. Of course, you're wanting to know how much money you can be asking for. Now, some funders are really useful because they've got websites, and those websites tell you all of this information, and they just have it nice and clear there. Some of these websites haven't been updated since 1999, but we'll forgive them for that if they're going to write us some checks. But there are some funders, in fact, quite a lot of funders, who don't have nice, useful websites. And so we have to do a bit more digging. And actually, Google is your friend. If you want to do a bit of digging, you can do a search there, but also visit the Charity Commission if they're registered as a charity, or Companies House if they're registered as a business, as some of them are. And you can access their annual reports. And in their annual reports, or their annual accounts, you'll see the names of different charities that they want to fund. And likelihood is, if they're going to fund you and you kind of know the area that you're working in, there's going to be names of charities in there that are familiar to you. They also quite often tell you the size of the gifts that they've made to each of those charities. And then you can kind of see, well, hang on a minute, if they're just making gifts of £5,000 to every charity, I probably want to be applying for a gift of £5,000. If there's one charity, by the way, that's received the gift of like £50,000 and everybody else is £2,000 and £3,000, don't go applying for £50,000, because you guarantee you there's some kind of, I know you, so I'm going to give you a bigger gift going on in the background. So you've got an idea of who you can apply for, restrictions on applications. We just talked about language they use. We'll talk about that in a little minute when we're thinking about how to pull together a really good application. Who else have they funded? We've just talked about that. And number 9 is a new one. Who is the gatekeeper? Now, for most trusts, when you send an application into them, let's think about you posting out a letter to them, and it lands on their doorstep. It's not the decision makers typically who are going to pick up that letter from the doorstep and read it. In the smallest funders, it will be. But in most medium and larger funders, they employ somebody who plays the role of a gatekeeper. Now, they won't be called a gatekeeper. They'll be called a secretary or a grant manager, somebody like that. But what their job is basically to open up your application, read it through, and score it against a framework, like a decision-making framework. And the reason that they use this framework, and I've got an example of one of those that I'll maybe share around with you all after the session when the slides are shared around. The idea of that framework is that it boosts fairness. It takes objectivity out of it, or it tries to. You can never fully do that because we're working with people, but it aims for fairness, which allows you as maybe more of an amateur writer or applier, fundraiser, to be scored equally with those who are professionals and who have been doing it for 35, 40 years. No, it's not perfect, and it's never going to be perfect. And the decision making isn't always rational, but it's an effort on their part to do it. So what that gatekeeper does is the gatekeeper typically scores it, and then they actually go a step further and they summarize your application. And then that summary and that score gets put before the decision-making panel if it meets a certain threshold. If it doesn't meet the threshold, it just goes in the bin and it's not considered. That can be a bit disheartening, actually, when you put your heart and soul into your application. On occasion, the trustees or the decision makers, should I say, can ask to see your full application and consider it on its own merits just like that. But most of the time it's scored by the gatekeeper. So if you can get to know that gatekeeper, and when I say know it, it doesn't have to be a personal relationship, but if you can know who they are, and when you're sending an email to them or you're writing them a letter, if you can address it to them, or if you're struggling to find out some of this information that's going to be very useful, or you've got a question about your application and you pick up the phone and talk to them, then they're going to be waiting for your application to come, and they're going to recognize your charity name, and that's going to get you automatically a little step ahead of everybody else. Getting to know their gatekeeper, making their lives easier is really important. And actually, it's crucial. There was work, I say work, there was research done by the Directory for Social Change a couple of years ago, and they discovered that 1 out of every 3 applications that are sent by us fundraisers are not eligible for funding. In other words, it's a youth project applying for money from a funder that funds a project with the elderly. 1 in 3, 30%. That's a huge waste of time for the trusts. And if you can clearly demonstrate straight away how your project that you're about to pitch to them matches really well with their organization and their ideas for what they want to fund, then you're going to be ahead of the game as well. And so the whole idea of eligibility is hugely important. So read the guidance that they've got, search for it, and reread it as well, just to make sure that you don't miss anything really obvious. If you can't find that criteria, or if you've got a question about it, try and speak to the funder. And I say speak because ideally you want to be picking up the phone. If they don't have a phone number, then an email will do. I've never had a response to a letter that I've sent, a physical letter. Picking up the phone is ideal. And actually, most of the gatekeepers, who are the people that you're going to talk to, are just really lovely people. They do that job because they want to give money away to charities, because they want to see the world a better place. I've talked to maybe one or two in all of my years that are grumpy old men, but apart from that, they tend to be just wonderful humans. And unless you're asking them a really daft question that they've already answered online, they're more than happy usually to listen to your kind of proposal in very light form, what you're thinking, and let you know if it's a good idea to apply. They can also tell you, no, it's not worth applying because we've received too many, or it's not a perfect fit, something like that, which is going to save you the time. Because if you do still apply, it's going to be a waste of your time because they're not going to say yes. That can be quite hard because you need to go and find another funder then. You get a bit low because they don't want your application. But it's going to save you time, and that's a good thing, really. So try and speak to the funder if you can. Number 3 is don't send blanket appeals. I had one funder put it to me like this. Imagine, Dave, that you had £10,000 to give to a charity, and you had 5 different charities writing to you. But one of those charities didn't write you a personal letter. They just sent you a generic letter through the post. Are you going to give that money to that charity that sent you the generic letter? Of course not. You're going to go to one of the charities that actually took the time to apply to you individually. And that's what we need to be thinking about when we come to our applications as well, how we can make it individual to that trust, but not have it consume lots and lots of our time. Do your research. We've just talked about that. And we've also talked about the last ones of kind of the whole idea of cutting down on the competition. Look for funders that only fund in your particular area, in your town, in your county, in your region, because it's going to cut out everybody else from being able to apply. And also, the closer down you can get into your particular kind of work, then that's going to be really strong for you as well. We've got a funder up here in Scotland who I was talking to last year, and they only fund early intervention work in the Glasgow region. Absolutely brilliant for those charities that want that kind of, run that kind of project, but work only in Glasgow. Eligibility, really, really, really important to get right. That is the top of the top tips from today. Planning your work. That comes next. Now, we've actually kind of already talked about most of these elements. So knowing your organization's priorities and the amount of money that you need to raise and when, we've talked about that already. The timings according to your projects and according to, the windows of applications for the different trusts, we've talked about that as well. But there are some elements that we should be thinking about as well. The first one on the slide here is we've got success ratios. In other words, how well are you doing? Now, I've been doing this for a long time, and my general success ratio for a decent project is 1 in 5. So I send out 5 applications and one of them will come back positive. That's the benchmark that I set myself. I do some training and consultancy work with a specific grants consultancy company, so they're the total experts, and their success rate is they send off 3 applications and they get 1 back. So it's better than mine because they're specialists and I'm a generalist. If you're new to this, I think you can be expecting to receive 1 positive application back for every 10 strong applications that you send back. I would really love for you to be hitting more of a success rate that's more like maybe 1 in 6, or even bettering mine at 1 in 5. In fact, that's what I hope for you. But there's going to be more no's than there are yeses. And actually, there's not going to be any no's. You're just not going to hear anything. So after 6 months after you've sent it in, you just assume that they've said no. And that can be quite hard emotionally sometimes, because so you need to celebrate your wins. I think that's important. So success ratios, it's important to understand how well you're doing. Just to put a bit more context around that, I think I was, when I was pulling this session together, I talked to a few funders. The Lloyds Bank Foundation, they're a bit of a law unto themselves, and they do what they can to try and fund 1 out of every 2 applications that come through to them. They make relatively small grants and they don't always give in the way that you want them to, but 1 out of every 2. Esme Fairburn. I'm sure you've heard of them. If you're thinking about, families work and children's work, they they can fund about 1 in every 4 applications that they receive in. The Joseph Rowntree Trust, which is one of the Sainsbury's family trusts, which is a big group of funders in the UK, really significant source of funding, actually, they can only do 1 in 6. That's why success ratios are really low, because the competition is really, really high. And don't take it personally. When you're planning which ones you're going to focus on, well, which projects are you running more important? What's those priorities that you've got from the leadership of your organization? And if you are the leadership of your organization, what's your most important project? If you only run one project, then that's nice and easy. Also, you want to maybe prioritize those applications that are going to bring in more money than those that are going to bring in a fewer amounts. If you're putting in one application and you might get £5,000 or £10,000 back from it, you're going to prioritize that and want to do it at a better time than maybe an application that's going to bring you back £500 or £1,000. Though we wouldn't say no to £500 or £1,000. Prioritization is key in planning. Of course it is. That runs throughout planning, no matter what you're doing. And we've already said about the importance of recording what you're doing, building up your bank of knowledge and your bank of history and experience in this so you can refer back to it in future, because it is a consistent year-on-year search to improve what you're doing. Planning, really important. Actually, it's actually slightly more important in trusts and foundations because it does have a long tail than in other kinds of fundraising. So the average time, apparently, I read from the Association of Charitable Foundations, between you submitting an application and getting it back is about 4 months, which is another weakness actually of trust fundraising. If you're in trouble and an emergency and you're having to, you can't keep the lights on next month, trust funding is not going to be the answer to your problem. Right, let's move on to think about the application now. So you've got 2 forms of application, as we've said already. You've got either the application form or you've got a free form letter. And if you have created the most beautifully worded and presented application letter, and the trust wants you to fill in an ugly, horrible application form, you have to fill in the ugly, horrible application form. Do not send in a letter. It won't get read. And those application forms can sometimes be a bit confusing. And if you do get confused by any of the questions, just try and talk to the funder and ask for a bit of clarity. That really is a good tip to go and try and do. But we're not going to think about the application forms for this bit. We're going to think about creating a application letter, which we might send via email or we might pop in the post. So best practice is you've got a cover letter to introduce what's going on, which would be the body of the email. And then you've got 2 sides of A4 to work with. Now, when you're looking at a blank 2 sides of A4, it looks like loads of space, but you'll soon find that actually space is very, very tight. And knowing what to include and what to leave out is part of the art of this form of fundraising. Now, I have a saying to live by, which is the next slide. Oh, there we go. When we're thinking of putting together our application, we want to give them everything that they want and nothing that they don't. Now, I wish I could give credit to the person who told me this, but I've forgotten, so I can't. So I'll just take all the glory. But this is what we want to do. Give them everything that they want and nothing that they don't. Now, that means if they do not ask for your annual accounts, you don't need to send them. Just put the link into the email so they can go and find it with the Charity Commission or however you're registered. If they do ask for the accounts, then yes, you need to send them the accounts and send them in full, not an abbreviated version. It means that if you're putting together a lovely glossy sheet of photos and they've not asked for it, they're not going to consider it, because it's unfair to the other charities that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is giving them everything they want and nothing that they don't. It's really useful to have a checklist actually before you send in each application, just to make sure you've got everything down there. I love that. It really does help in the proposal. So what we're thinking about doing is writing this application. And if you've never done it before, we've got 6 kind of bullets on this slide, which is a good way to kind of lay out your application, starting with the summary and moving through to future funding plans. We're trying to keep it to 2 sides of A4. We're wanting to make it very clear. So have a section header for each one of these sections to help people who are scanning your application access it. We want it to look clear, but not necessarily beautiful, like including photos and that kind of thing's not going to buy you much favor. Usually you definitely want to be avoiding things like waffle. You want to be avoiding things like jargon, and you're just leaving space for high impact writing. There's a tiny amount of room for you to use emotional language, but actually you want to be approaching this professionally. Case studies, if you can squeeze one in, or if you can work one through the narrative of your application, then include it, because it brings a bit of reality to the application. But that's maybe not something you want to think about if you're doing your first few applications, because that's actually quite complicated. Now we're going to zoom in on 2 of the most important sections. But before we do that, I just wanted to quickly say what the purpose of the summary and the organisation introduction is. This is your first paragraph, and you really only do have 1 paragraph for this. The purpose of that, is to build up a picture of trust with this funder. So that funder starts to think, oh, these folks know what they're talking about, and we can trust them to achieve with the money that we're going to send them. That's what you want to be doing. So you want to be, talking a bit about your history. If you've been doing this for 30 years and you've been successful for 30 years, then that increases the trust that's available. If you haven't, but you've got people who have got amazing qualifications and experiences, you want to be just mentioning them, just really briefly, but building up that picture of trust. What you also want to do, and I use this as kind of a standalone statement, is demonstrate how your project perfectly matches what that trust aims to do. I actually cheat, and I include that in the cover letter as well, so they know that they should jolly well be reading and paying attention to my application, because it does what they want to do as an organization. It's a partnership made in heaven. That's what we want to portray. So we've done that. And then we go on and talk about the problem and the need. I was doing grants training yesterday, in fact, and I had one charity on the cause who was working with a really niche medical condition. There was a charity raising money for research and awareness around that niche medical condition that nobody had ever heard of. I can't even remember it, and it was yesterday. I've actually got it written on the back of a bit of paper that's by my feet at the moment. They, because of the complexity of what they're doing, need to spend more time talking about the need than maybe you folks do. Because I'm just going on my assumption, you folks probably work in areas that are quite well understood. Families that are struggling and need support, young people needing those, role models to bring them around, or, folks needing help with understanding nutrition because they were never taught it as children, for example. And what you're wanting to do in this is just prove that your need is real. You're not looking at proving that this is the biggest need in the world. You're just looking at proving that it is real. And it's real because you've got your own evidence that shows that it's real. But you've also got external evidence as well. There's been research papers. The government and the council are thinking about doing this. This is what our local school told us. This is what we're experiencing from our work with the local nurseries. You're mixing this together to just present the fact that this is a reality for people, and it's a bad reality for people. And guess what? You as the trust can give us money, and we're going to fix that for people. That's what you want to be doing with the problem and the need. You don't need to be writing loads and loads and loads unless you really do have to. Can you do it in a paragraph? If you can save more space to talk about what is really important to be talking about. And that's the solution that you're providing. What we want to do here is we want to show the funder what change they're buying. We want to be showing the funder how their money is making the world a better place. So what you want to do is you need to talk about the activities that you're doing, but you don't want to spend too long talking about those activities. For example, if you're running a youth group, you don't need to go into the individual details of what you're doing with those young people, because there are youth groups running all over the country and it's not exactly revolutionary. If you have some super unique way of working, sure, you might want to talk about that very briefly, but don't spend too long explaining your activities, because funders don't want to give you money so you can do things. Funders want to give you money so you can achieve things, so you can generate these positive changes and make the world a better place in the way that you do. So most of your time, you want to be talking about your impact, your outputs, the numbers of people that you're impacting, the depth of that and the breadth of that, the outcomes of what you're achieving, the changing levels of knowledge or behaviors or aspirations, those kind of touchy-feely things that really make our small organizations tick. They're probably the things that get you up in the morning and go back into work and deal with all the hassle that it is working in a small organization. That's where we want to be spending our time. And we want to be directly showing those funders that they can be part of making this change. The impact is where you want to be spending. So I say, give yourself the luxury of half a page to talk about the impact and demonstrate it. And also to be making promises about what level of impact you're going to be making and how you're going to report that back to the funder in 12 months' time, for example. Because these funders are just like regular donors. They deserve to find out what they're giving, what their generosity actually achieves. And the better you can do that, actually, the more likely you are to receive another grant from them. And it can even, as I've experienced, get to the stage where you forget to apply to a funder for their funding deadline, and they send you an email and say, we've actually reserved some money for you, but we didn't get an application. Is there anything we can fund in your organization? Because you've built up that relationship with them. And that takes a long, long time, but it's very possible. And actually, that's where you want to get your sights on. That kind of, we're kind of going outside the normal channels when it comes to getting these grants in. That's what the super professionals do. And and for you folks who are close to the charity hub of the UK, which is London, have got a better chance than others, especially up here in the sticks of Glasgow, for example, of being able to do that and actually circumventing by doing networking and by impressing people. So we've done a paragraph of introduction to build up trust. We've done maybe a little sentence standing on its own to just make it super clear how we meet the needs or meet the ideals of the trust. We've talked about the need, and we've justified the fact that this is a real need for people. Maybe not the biggest need in the world, but we don't have to be. It is real. And then we've gone on and we've talked about how their money is going to make a difference to the folks that we are going to work with. You've then got space for a budget, and that budget should show just very high level kind of headlines about the costs that are going to be incurred. And you want to have 10% in there for your monitoring and evaluation, and that can be diverted to core costs. If you're feeling brave, you want 10% in there for fundraising costs as well, which again can be diverted to core costs. If adding an extra 20% on your budget is too scary, just go for the impact and measurement. It's going to make you look professional, even if it does increase the price of the project. And it frees it up, as I said, to be used as core costs rather than just being reserved for that one particular project that you're writing for. And then under the budget, you've got space for your funding plan. How are you going to make sure that this project is sustainable in the future once this grant has all been used up? There's a lot to fit into 2 A4 pages, but with a bit of experience, you can get there. So some top application tips. I was chatting to a funder and they said any application that comes in with a quote that says this charity saved our lives, well, what they said was that that quote doesn't work for them, because just about every charity comes in with a quote that says without this service I would be much, much worse for wear. So avoid that whole kind of idea of overused phrases. We're writing to people who understand the layout of the third sector most of the time. And so they don't need to be talked to with the kind of same kind of language that we would use for talking to, Joe Public on the streets. Always ask for a specific amount. That funder is not restricted to giving you that amount. They can give you more, they can give you less. But if you ask for a specific amount and it's of, in a sensible range that they're happy to fund, then that gives them an idea of how important their funding is to you. Use a font that's legible. Unless they say otherwise, don't use a serif font. So don't write in Times New Roman, for example, if they want to. It used to be the case that the printed word, if it had the little flicks on it, like some fonts do have, made it easier for humans to read. But we've been reprogrammed by computers and mobile phones. Use a sans serif font. The one that I use on my presentations is called Mooli, and I think it's brilliant because the letter A, as you can see on here, when it's in lowercase, actually looks like an A and not the weird computer squiggly thing. Make sure it's legible. Use a lot of white space if you can to space out things, and play with your margins to make sure that you can still squeeze in everything that's important. Quite often they'll want multiple copies of your application, so make sure it is clear when it's printed or it's clear when it's photocopied as well, because they're a bit archaic, some of these trusts right now. And of course, include everything they ask for and nothing that they don't. One other top application tip is when you're on their website, you get an idea for the language that they're using. You get an idea for their vibe. Are they professional? Are they empathetic? That kind of thing. If you can mirror that back to them, even if it's not necessarily the language that you typically use, then you're going to be speaking their language. And that's going to help your application be more clear for them, so they're going to understand it. And if you can refer your application to somebody external to your organization and they can check it for that clarity, do they understand what you're talking about? Then that's going to hold you in good stead as well. So that brings us to the end. There's a couple of other slides for you to engage with when they do come round. We've got a little top reasons why applications fail, and that's based on research from the Directorate of Social Change as well. And we've got a couple of pages of useful resources for you to check out, and also directions back to Triceratops training. So there we go. And that comes, I told you it was going to be a whistle-stop tour. I'm surprised you've not all fallen asleep, or you're not all just like pushed under the table by the stress of taking all of that in. We've got 5 minutes left. And if there are any questions from that barrage that's just come to you, please do feel free to, you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can use the chat. If unmuting and talking is a bit scary for you, you can use the chat to ask, and I'll see if I can answer a question for you. Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, David, it's Malcolm Clark here from
Hi, Malcolm.
Hi, yeah. One of the questions or the thoughts that came up earlier in your presentation was, I see a lot of funders are asking or insisting that the projects have not started before they've issued the funding, and that sort of throws me in a bit of confusion, because do funders expect you to sort of be virgin projects and nothing else has happened? Because obviously all of us are working constantly on building our charities. So one of the projects I'm working on, an arts and culture thing, and we've done some workshops, we've done that, we want more funding for that, but a lot of funding I'm seeing is saying, oh, if you've started it, you don't qualify, basically. Do you come across that a lot, and is there a solution to that?
Yeah, so it depends on the desires of the funder, really. So in that kind of situation, I would always say talk to the funder first of all. But you've got some funders that only like to fund new things because they like shiny, exciting new things. So when you're researching that funder, look out for words that are like high risk projects or pilot programs or prime funding or sometimes pump prime funding. That means they're only going to fund new stuff, and that's annoying because sometimes, however, if you're getting to the end of maybe a strategic cycle with a project and you're kind of evaluating and you're going to implement lots of learning at one go that's going to enhance that project, sometimes those trusts can be open to seeing that as a new project. It's like you finished a stage 1 of that project and you're now moving on to a stage 2 of that project. If that's not the case and that funder's still saying that, then you need to find another funder, which is there. Yeah, okay. Which is where it is, Malcolm.
Cheers.
Anybody got anything else they would like to ask, or any other insight that they might like to have to share with other folks? No? See if there is anything that comes to you at 2 o'clock in the morning when you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, oh, I didn't ask Dave that. I should have asked Dave that. My email address is in the chat now. Thank you, Terry, for asking for that. Please do get in touch and ask away. I can't promise you I'll have an answer. Well, I will have an answer, but it might not be a decent answer. But I'm not going to get back to you at 2 o'clock in the morning, but please do reach out and connect with me. I'd love to be that kind of source of support for you. And also the guys at SABS know what they're doing with this kind of funding as well. So, chat to them, talk to each other as well and support each other. Yeah, and just remember, it's not the be all and end all of fundraising as well. I spend a lot of my time having to assure boards, trustees especially, that there are other forms of fundraising other than just trusts and grants. But I really hope you do well. Excellent. There we go. I think that's brought us to the end of the session. Any closing marks that we need to make, Mickey or Roger?
Oh, just a quick one, Dave. Thank you very much for that. Brilliantly informative as always. And we'll follow up this session with everyone with the slides, a resource, and then we'd also welcome any feedback. So there'll be a little short survey that you can fill out. And of course, information to Triceratops training as well. But thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you for the next one.